you've got a problem, and we're going to use a big patch on it. And it would appear to me it's like having a sprained ankle and cut the leg off to solve our problem. And I think that sometimes whenever we look at a problem, we need to find out what the problem is and then go back and fix that problem. Don't fix or have all the unintended consequences of what Congressman Westmoreland was talking about here. I think that too often times what appears to me anyway in this situation is that this piece of legislation is so broad, it's going to provide an umbrella over everything that when everybody has any sort of monetary transaction. And I think that you gentlemen today have really kind of helped define where we need to be going with this thing and settle in on where the real problem is. And it's the big guys who have stumbled along here and not done things the way they should have. And a lot of other folks are being caught in this net. And so I guess my comment is to you, have I identified this correctly? Do you think that basically we need to be looking at the too big to fail guys that are really where the problem seems to originate from, or are there some small players in this who have got enough blame to go around and we can play with them too? Start Mr. Robinson. I don't think you guys have got any problems. You only had one insurance company, and that was the investment portion of that was the problem versus the insurance company. Is that right?
That's correct, Congressman. If there's a common thread that I could recommend that might answer some of these questions, that is how broad a measure would be to cover all kinds of problems, is answering a certain or a simple question like who underwrites the risk and who prices it. Because you could have somebody saying, well, I thought the loan originator was. Well, I thought you were. Well, who is it, whether it's a credit default swap or a mortgage? And I think as we try to solve these issues, and there's no question that there's issues to be solved, that instead of perhaps picking a number of too big to fail, say, all right, you're big. What are your exposures, and how much capital do you have to handle what statisticians would call the tail events, things that you don't think happens? And if they cannot answer those questions clearly, and they perhaps have no idea, then that might aim you towards the real root cause of the issue. And that might be a good step I would recommend.
Okay.
I think you're right to identify the scope of the proposed CFPA as one of the problems. There are a couple other issues, including, for example, that it separates out consumer protection from safety and soundness regulation. And so you might have one regulator telling you to go left and the other regulator telling you to go right with no way to really reconcile the differences. That clearly will impact the availability of credit, particularly for smaller firms. The other issue is just the ill definition of all the terms. For example, it sets up a new vaguely defined abuse standard. What our study reveals is that a product that might seem to be abusive for one individual consumer in a particular financial condition might be the lifeline for a small business to meet their payroll that week, and perfectly appropriate for the small business. It's very hard to imagine how a federal regulator could anticipate those differences and make sure we don't accidentally cut off the vital lifeline of credit for small businesses.
Just my time's being run out here, so I just want to very quickly with Mr. Hirschman and Mr. Loy and Mr. Harris, just very quick answers here. I know we're going to have some bankers coming up here in the next section. I was curious about access to credit because I think that really impacts small businesses and small communities, especially in the suburbs of our cities. Have you had any comments or any problems with some of your members of the Chamber of Commerce with regards to access to credit that you'd care to comment on? Particular industries or in particular?
Access to credit is a significantly enhanced problem in this crisis. What our study finds is that even before the crisis, half of the smallest firms had access to credit problems. Right? This is not it's clearly magnified. I don't know whether you point the finger. Obviously, you don't want banks to make loans that are being given to inadequate people who don't have the adequate credit. On the other hand, you want to make sure that small businesses have credit. That's why this secondary credit market, if you will, the ability of small firms to rely on their personal credit, especially when they're starting business, is vital to startups and vital to creating new jobs in this country.
I agree with a slight caveat, which is most of the businesses we fund are so raw. I mean, they're pure garage startups that they're not eligible for credit. So we don't use credit Our companies typically don't until they've grown into these larger entities. And it's at that stage where historically we've been able to start bringing in credit providers to scale the job creation, et cetera. That's now not happening. And so we're having to supply more and more equity to later stage startups. And that's causing us to not have as much ability to invest in the brand new things. So there is a fall off in seed stage company creation because the capital that we have that was supposed to be for that is filling the role that debt used to play for our larger companies.
Time has
Thank you.
expired.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Fallon.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I couldn't make it for all the hearing, but I found what I have heard very interesting, and maybe I'll just talk to you about what I'm hearing back in my home state of Oklahoma. I'm still hearing from